It's interesting to note the Autism Committee was hearing about mental health supports for people with autism this morning as well, and I note as well that the subcommittee on mental health was meeting this morning, and balkanisation was mentioned. It's interesting, even in the houses of the Oireachtas this morning, 3 different committees were meeting on more or less the same issue, and I wonder, do we sometimes see across the thing? I share, as a former primary school teacher, I share some of that frustration that I've heard from members here about teachers are often the last to know, last to hear and the last to be listened to. Do you know, despite the fact that they spend 25 hours plus a week in the company of these children, and often apart from their parents, are the people in the world who know these children best. Yet there doesn't seem to be a way to make those teaching professionals heard in terms of provision of mental health services, and that's a huge opportunity missed. The thing that jumped out at me from the IPPN presentation was that we should have teams of education and health professions to work with school clusters and individual schools to support children directly in the schools where they learn. And just to give a concrete, real-world example of that, I know of an inner-city Waterford school where children attending that school, there's 3 different CDNT teams represented within that school community. One of them's in Dungarvan, based out of Dungarvan, if you're in Waterford West. So some of the children there are supposed to access their services in Dungarvan. That's an hour from that school. It's an hour each way, plus the appointment. That's the parents' full day. For God's sake, why would, and the school is open to it, the school have talked to me about it, why on earth wouldn't we host the services within the school building? Now, I do know that it creates that kind of issue around competency and who's in charge of that, and there's already a heavy load on school principals without having to become health professionals, as well as everything else that they're supposed to do. But I do think there's opportunities there as well. I think, Paul, you said schools are really good at supporting the many, and it's the few. It's the few we need the specific help with. And Enda, you said that we see the role tapered, you know, and that really is the case. And I think we have a huge resource in terms of our teaching profession, notwithstanding the fact that we're losing teachers, you know, and either they're going abroad or they're moving to something else. But one of the strengths of education in Ireland is we have continued to attract really good candidates into the profession, and actually our education system is built on the quality of the teachers that we have, rather than other things. We're making progression in terms of, you know, pupil-teacher ratio and things like that. But it's the fact that we have good quality people in there, I think, is the foundation stone of our education system. But that piece, and Deputy Conway Walsh referred to, that piece around career progression, and allowing people and enabling people to move into something like educational psychology or provision of other services. Because other than that, when you enter the teaching career, you're either going to do 40 years in the classroom or you're going to take a principalship. And a lot of teachers that I know aren't interested in a principalship because you stop teaching. If you're a Woken principal, that's it. The day you enter principalship, you're now an admin person. You know, you can forget about teaching. You'll occasionally get to interact with classes, but most of the time you're giving out to bowel people. Do you know, which is probably not why you got into teaching in the first place. So we have a huge resource there, and people who need other, progression pathways. It seems clear as day to me that we should be pointing them in directions where they can support children and interact and teach children in a different way within our school systems. I would say on that piece about educational psychologists, I mean, it would be such a huge resource, even while people are training, if they could provide, for want of a better word, that triage service, you know, of looking at the needs and just kind of making sense of them, and then by the time they actually, you know, the children are sat in front of the educational psychologist, you're making best use of that time. You're not engaging in form filling. So I don't know if anything that I've said there has amounted to a question in terms of punctuation marks. I don't know if I quite got to a question mark at the end of that. It's mainly observations, but if any of those you feel merit comment.
If I might just maybe initially kick the ball there. I think the CDNT, exactly what the Deputy was saying, that's a massive frustration for us. If I could give an example, we have one special school in our area in Dublin 15 that has 5 CDNTs working with it. So I can talk to you about this child with speech and language difficulties, but not this child. That child doesn't have a speech and language therapist in his service. And there's one principal dealing with all of 5 different services. It's absolutely, and we said this at the start when CDSTs were being reconfigured, this was the wrong way to do it. So we are proactively working with that. We have convinced the HSE to come on board and to put one service for that school in, see how it works, put all the resources into that in one case, and then if we can show that it works successfully there, let's move it out beyond that. I think absolutely the whole notion of teacher career progression as well, we have to grow up about this, we have to be mature about this, and you've hit the nail on the head in relation to teacher progression. Not everybody wants to be sitting in 6th class for 40 years, or 5th class, or 4th class, or 3rd. That we have different routes. If we have that talent and that availability is there, and the need is there as well to match them up. But also the idea of getting people in training, and we've said this to speech and language therapists as well as psychologists in training, out and working in schools as well to assist and to do some of the lifting along the way. I think that would really be welcome as well. And I suppose the other thing I do want to, Deputy O'Loughlin, or Senator O'Loughlin, again to re-emphasise the huge amount of work that is going on in schools. You're absolutely right. I had in my school a tragedy when we had 5 deaths in 1 year, one by suicide. Every single time people looked to the school community for leadership. Every single time they looked, where is the principal in this? And what can we bring to the table? And I suppose schools are more than willing to bring that expertise with them, to bring that compassion, dare I say it, to bring that love with them as well. But when we put our hand out for the support, I think that's where the support has been found lacking. So I hope maybe that answers some of the issues that both of you have raised.
If I may, I think that issue of fluidity is very important, because what we find in our schools that oftentimes the principals or leaders in school, they'll identify people who might be good in a caring capacity, and they'd like to get those people maybe trained up as guidance counsellors, for instance. But to do that, you have to take, say, an 18-month course. There's financial implications to that. There's release implications with at school level. So I think we could do a little bit of work to allow that kind of fluidity that you've mentioned, because it is very important for the profession.
In fact, John, the teachers will incur a cost. They won't receive an extra payment.
That's the problem.
They won't have an additional qualification allowance. They'll never pay back the cost of their fees, never mind the release and all else.
And that's the problem. And again, I suppose prior to the cutbacks back around 2010, there were more opportunities for people to be able to get money back, if you like, in the system. But we could look at it, because you're right, there are people in the system who would be brilliant in the areas of sort of mental health and looking after the students. And at school level, you'd know who they are. But if you could get those people to do a training course whereby they're not disadvantaged financially, and the school has some kind of a release means, if you like, of doing that, because we have huge problems at the moment, especially in the area of guidance counselling, and we just don't have enough people out there. So I absolutely take the point about fluidity. I think it's hugely important.
Okay.
I suppose to pick up on that, we had a maternity leave in our school a couple of years ago, and because we couldn't actually get a full teacher in to do the job, we got somebody to cover the classes, and then with the pastoral role that the particular person had, we got in a psychologist to work with us, and the richness that brought to the experience of our school support team, our pastoral care, was extraordinary. And it would have been a brilliant jumping off point for us to be able to encourage one or two of those, exactly those staff, to pursue that sort of an area, whether it is simply as a counsellor or whether it's as a psychologist. But that avenue just is not open to them, and we lose because of that. I suppose our whole school community loses because of that.
Briefly, Mr. Montgomery, yeah.
And I'm very conscious around the table of the preponderance of representation at post-primary. At primary level, the idea of having an administrative deputy principal or a counsellor or a chaplain, they don't exist. Those roles don't exist at all. And with the moratorium and in-school leadership teams for the last decade as well, the supports that we have there are minuscule, and the only service that we have available to us are special education teachers who are literally run ragged at the moment, dealing with all of the other educational issues that they have to deal with. So, I mean, I know resources are finite, but the idea that we could have any of those supports at primary level would be a dream to us, and we don't have access to any of them, unfortunately. I know Eileen has mentioned that as well in her submission, but you know, getting that support, and I think it's well demonstrated the need for it at this stage at primary, particularly at the senior primary level, because the problems children are experiencing at post-primary in the past are right in there in our senior and even our mid-primary schools as well.
I think it's worth saying as well, those posts of responsibility are actually fantastic value for money to the taxpayer. You get a lot of expertise, you get a lot of experience for not a great deal extra money, and they have a huge role in contributing to, you know, facets all across the school, not just in terms of mental health, but in terms of curricular implication, you know, implementation, all of those things.
I think